So Sandy is the founder of Fundraising TV and the chief encouragement officer at Get Fully Funded, where she shows passionate nonprofit leaders how to fully fund their big vision so they can spend their time saving lives instead of worrying about money. She's helped dozens of small animal welfare nonprofits go from nickel and dime fundraising to adding six figures to their bottom line. As a trainer, she shows her students how to find ideal donors, connect with them through authentic messaging, and build relationships that stand the test of time so that fundraising becomes easy and predictable. Sandy served as a volunteer and board member for a variety of animal rescue nonprofits, including Animal League Defense Fund. Sandy's based in Loudon, Tennessee. Find out more about her fundraising system at getfullyfunded.com. Excellent. All right, Sandy, I'm going to turn this over to you.
All right, fantastic. All right, let me just make sure that you're seeing the slides and everything is working.
Everything looks good to me. Kristen, are you good?
Yeah, everything looks great to me as well.
Perfect, because it's the cat conference, right? I don't have a cat with me today, but I do have my small dog here in the office with me, and hopefully she'll be nice and quiet for us. All right, welcome everybody. Happy Saturday. I know this is kind of a crazy thing to be working on fundraising on Saturday, but you know what? That tells me you are committed to doing what it takes to raising money, to saving more cats. And I commend you all for being willing to do what it takes to make a big difference in the world. In fact, that is really what this is all about. It is about helping more animals. I know that you're incredibly passionate about the work that you're doing. You got into this because you can't stand to see animals suffering. And then you realized, oh, I have to raise money. And there's a whole lot of other stuff that I have to deal with here. I bet there's a lot of you that had that experience. I've had people say to me, in fact, listen, I got into this because I care about animals. I don't want to deal with the people. I don't want to deal with the money. I don't want to run a business. Except that if you're in a position of leadership, congratulations, that's what you're dealing with. What I want to talk about this morning to get the day kicked off is to get you focused in the right direction of how to be effective, not just busy. Because the truth is, we all have more on our plate than we can possibly get done during the day. Am I right? Yes. There's just so much to do, especially if you're the Lone Ranger in your organization. If it's you, if your organization is all volunteer, or even if it's not all volunteer, if you have staff, you have team, you have lots of things going on, there's still more to do than you can ever get done. And the minute that you feel like you've got good systems in place, there's some new thing that comes along, whether it's COVID or it's TikTok or it's something else on the scene that you're like, what the crap is that? Now I got to figure that out too. So there's always something. If you can drop back and develop the skill of managing your day, managing your time, managing your focus, managing your priorities, you will find a way to be way more effective in getting things done. And really, at the end of the day, that's what matters. At the end of the day, it's about how many lives did you save? How many spay-neuter surgeries did you get done? How many adoptions happened? How many fosters? How many of those kind of things? And that's what really matters at the end of the day. I know that if you're like me, there's so many things you say yes to, and then later you're like, what was I thinking? What did I do that for? When you have some focus, it's much easier to start saying no to the things that you don't need to be doing in the right place. All right, more about all this coming up, but I just want to set the stage that when you are effective, not just busy, you're actually going to get more done. You're going to raise more money. You're going to be more productive in your community. You're going to save more lives. And that's what this is all about. What I want to teach you today is something that I call the GOAT technique. It's the GOAT technique for managing your world. And I love this picture of this little funny goat. That'll help us remember as we go today that we really do need to be effective, not just busy. If you don't already have the handout for this session, grab that. There's a place for you to jot down the notes. If you don't have it, just grab a pen and some paper. You're going to want to take some notes as we go. So a little bit more about me. I am a fundraising nerd. I love raising money, and this is very good news for you. I am all about the practical tactical. I hate going to webinars and conferences and things where the speakers are all in their head. It's all academic and they're sharing all this theory. And then you walk away and you're like, well, that was interesting, but I don't know what to do next. I don't do that. So I'm going to give you some very practical, tactical things today that you can use right away. I'm a trainer and I understand that if I can make you laugh, that's good. But if I can give you a couple of nuggets that you can walk away and actually start using today or Monday, this is good news. This will be a fantastic use of your time. I'm a blogger. I do have a lot of blog articles over at getfullyfunded.com. You can check that all out later. Huge animal lover. My husband and I are greatly outnumbered. This is my dog, Lucy. And then I have my other dog, Maggie, here in the office with me. We have 5 cats and 2 horses, and occasionally we foster mini donkeys, and we do independent rescue too, because we live on a farm and there's always an animal that just randomly shows up and we take care of them and find them a home. So that's a little bit about me. I'm with you that I'm a huge animal lover, cannot stand to see suffering, abuse, and neglect. The difference between you and me is I cannot do the frontline work. I am a little too tender-hearted, but how I can help is by helping you learn how to raise money. That's my gift, and that's how this all works. I've been working in fundraising since about 1998, so quite a while. I've worked in a variety of different kinds of organizations, and in 2005 started Get Fully Funded because I really wanted to just be able to help more people. So this is what I do. I'm on the phone with somebody every day, helping them figure out how to raise money, helping them figure out how to pivot in the middle of COVID, helping them figure out how to do more of what they do. So I'm here to help. What I want to talk in detail about today is about planning and strategy. Planning and strategy, and we're going to talk a little bit about what each of those are and why you need them. Now, some of you may be rolling your eyes thinking, yeah, I know I need a plan, but I don't like planning. And maybe you feel like planning really puts you in a box and then you can't do things on the fly. And that's not really true. Plans don't have to be written in concrete. They just need to be able to guide you forward. So don't feel like that once you put a plan together that it's not changeable, because it is changeable. Strategy is probably a little more important. And one of the biggest reasons is because we're so busy. As I mentioned earlier, we all have way more on our plate than we will ever get done. My to-do list is ridiculous every day. And that actually is not, it's not very good in terms of self-care to put more on your list than you can get done, because it actually sets you up for failure and frustration, which is not a good idea. We have so much going on, and there's always a new opportunity. That's the hard thing, is there's always somebody calling you saying, hey, I just found this cat, can you help? Or, hey, I just ran across this colony, can you help? There's always something else going on. When you have a strategy, it's going to pave the way and help you see very clearly what to say yes to and what to say no to. Now, here's a piece of truth. This is a writer downer. When you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. If you're just kind of doing what you do every day, like, oh, we're just going to save as many cats as we can, that's not a bad thing, but it's not as good as it could be. When you have a real specific goal about what you want to accomplish, how many cats, or the difference you want to make in your community, it's much easier, number one, to know if you're doing the things during the day that are going to help you reach that goal. And number two, you'll know when you cross the finish line. So let's look a little more at strategy and planning. So strategy is about the where and why. So in other words, where are you going to plug in your community to make a difference, and why are you doing what you're doing? Planning is the how. Planning is the, okay, if we're going to double the number of cats that we save this year, here's how we're going to do that. Number one, we're going to need more supplies. Number two, we're going to need more funds. Number three, we're going to need more volunteers. And then you can start laying out the detailed plans of how you're going to make that all possible. But the strategy is probably the more important thing to start with. And unfortunately, most people either have no strategy or their strategy doesn't really make any sense. Think of strategy as your plan of action designed to achieve a long-term or overall goal. Plan of action designed to achieve a long-term or overall goal. In other words, What are you doing that's going to make a difference in your community? One of the biggest things that I see that I think is an issue in the world of animal welfare, and I hope I don't step on anybody's toes here, but I think this needs to be said. There's a lot of repetition and duplication of services. There's a lot of organizations doing pretty much the same thing. And while there are plenty of animals that need help, in the minds of your community and in the minds of donors, they don't understand why there's so much duplication. So I live right outside Knoxville, Tennessee. And in Knoxville, there are two big organizations that do very, very similar things. And I think in the minds of most people in the community, they're like, why do we have two organizations that are saving animals? You have a Humane Society and you have another organization that's not called the Humane Society, but it functions more or less the same way. I could tell you the backstory behind why there are two, and how that all got started, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is the community's perception. What matters is there a need for both? And one of the organizations, actually, I did some work with a few years ago, and we had this conversation, and we said, how can we start to position your organization a little bit differently so that you are very clearly doing something that's different than the other organization? How can you distinguish what your organization does so that if you have a donor that says, wait a minute, aren't you doing the exact same things this organization down the road, that you can say, no, actually, we're slightly different. We are different. And so what's happened is the one organization has the animal control contract with the city. The other one is now working with shelters in the rural areas that are in the surrounding counties, those areas where they're not as well resourced. They don't have as many volunteers or donors. Their euthanasia rates are a little on the unacceptable side. And so this organization is working with those to strengthen those organizations. And it has made a very nice delineation in services. Now, are there things that both organizations do that's very much crossover? Yes. But that strategy of here's how we're going to define what we do a little bit differently now positions them a little differently in the minds of their donors. And when they're competing for grants, they can show how they're different. That's important. So this is why I want you to really be thinking about strategy for your organization. It's not just let's save as many as we can. Yes, there's a need for that. We're not quite where we need to be in terms of rescuing all animals, but you also want to make sure that you're doing it in such a way that it makes sense for your organization, it makes sense for your community, and it sets you up for success long term. I think really that's probably the more important thing. When you have a strategy, when you know exactly what you're trying to do, it does make life easier. You have direction. You know where you're going. You're focused. You're not easily distracted as if you didn't have a strategy. When you have strategy, you normally have like one program and it's really easy to explain. This is another issue with a lot of organizations. When you do like 15 different things, it's really hard to do the elevator speech exercise, because you can't come up in 6 words or 10 words or whatever the exercise is with exactly what your organization does when you do 15 different things. It's hard. So when you have a strategy and you say, you know what, there's lots of other organizations that are doing fill in the blank, we're not going to do that. We're going to focus on this one thing. It's so much easier. It's easier to describe. It's easier to measure progress. It's easier to raise money, frankly, because your story is so much easier to tell. Now, am I saying go stop everything else that you're doing? Not necessarily. What I want you to do is think. I want you to think about what your organization is doing that you're really, really good at, and what do you want to be known for? So I want to plant the seed of this idea of something that I call the one banana strategy. The one banana strategy. And the one banana strategy basically is you putting a flag in the ground for your nonprofit around one thing that you want to do better than anybody else in town, and you want to be known for this one thing. So you don't want to be trying to do 10 different things and not really doing any of them really, really well. You want to do one thing and nail it, and you want everybody in your area to know that you got this. If they've got a question about whatever this thing is, like, you're the one to go to. You're the expert. You do it better than anybody. Usually a one banana strategy is meeting an unmet need in the community. This is something that I don't see a lot of organizations in the animal welfare world do. I've got lots of other organizations in the rest of the nonprofit world who are real good at this, at looking around saying, okay, well, if we want to help single moms coming out of poverty, this is great. There's already a shelter, so we don't need to do that. And there's already this other program, we don't need to do that. But what's missing is this one piece. And then they do that one piece to meet that unmet need. That's a one banana strategy. It's so much easier when you have a one banana strategy. So let's say that in your community, there's a couple of organizations, or maybe there's some volunteers who are doing TNR, but nobody's really nailing it. And you decide that's what you want to do. You're going to be all about TNR. You are going to be the go-to. Then it's so much easier to collaborate with others because there's no competition. If nobody else is really doing it to the extent that you do, they don't have the knowledge that you do, then it's so much easier to partner with others, to partner with your local shelter, your municipal shelter, to partner with a humane society, to partner with somebody else for grants or to develop projects and so forth. It's also so much easier when you only do the one thing, when you have the one banana strategy, to stay focused on the one banana and you don't get all distracted. And you know as well as I do that there's so many things that happen every day where somebody says, oh my gosh, we have this need that needs to be met. And yeah, I think you guys can do that. And that's a real discipline to be able to say no to people. It's not easy. A lot of us are like, we're pleasers. We like saying yes to people. We don't want to tell people no, but it's hard if you don't know where you're going. When you're clear about your strategy, then that becomes a touch point for you so that no matter what opportunities pop up, you can always go back to the one banana strategy and say, okay, wait a minute. If we want to be the go-to organization to do TNR in our community, and that's what we're going to be known for, then that's going to be pretty easy to say no to some of these other things. We don't need to open a shelter. Somebody else is doing that. We don't need to do fill in the blank, whatever it is. Somebody else is doing that. Let's focus on what we do. Hopefully this is making sense for you. It does make life easier. And there's lots of different ways to pick the one banana strategy, but it comes down to looking at what is the one thing that your organization is uniquely positioned to do better than anybody, and does it meet an unmet need? So here are some examples of different things that could be your strategy. You could be, again, the premier TNR organization in the area. Maybe your strategy is you want to increase the save rate of senior dogs in your local shelter. We had a client several years ago that was their strategy. They saw way too many seniors in the shelter, and they wanted to provide a way to get those seniors out ASAP and find them homes. And they built their organization real fast because they were very focused, and they were able to do it. Maybe you want to lead the way in rescuing neonatal kittens, or maybe there's something else that you want to do. Whatever it is, just pick it and then get started making sure that you have the language and the messaging and the plans and everything to support that. So strategy comes first. You pick that, put that in place, and then you can move on to plans. Because remember, the strategy is about the where you're going to plug in and make a difference and why you're doing it. Strategy is much bigger picture. Planning is the how-to. The planning is the steps that you're going to take to make the strategy happen. So let's look in some more detail at plans. And now it is time to goat just a little bit. All right, grab your pen, because here's what GOAT stands for. This is a process of putting a plan together where we start with a goal, then we're going to look at opportunities, then we're going to look at the actions you need to take, and then we're going to look at tools and team. So goal, opportunities, action, tools, and team. And this gives you a way to start thinking about planning for your organization so that you can effectively reach your overall strategy without overworking and driving yourself completely crazy in the process, because that can happen. All right, let's start by talking about goal. Goals are an interesting thing. I find that a lot of people know they should have them, but not many people do. So I'm going to give you a tool for creating a goal that I find works really well. And the reason that works really well is because it gives you something very specific to shoot for and something specific to talk about. You see, when you have a very specific, clearly defined goal, it actually makes your fundraising easier because you can tell people what you're trying to do. And I'll put this in context of fundraising because that's what we're here for today, right? Is to learn how to raise more money. I find that there's a real difference between, let's say, going on Facebook and saying, hey, give to support our $10,000 goal, which is pretty boring, or saying, help us double the number of senior cats that we can pull out of our shelter this year. Help us increase our save rate on neonatal kittens. Help us. Like, that kind of a goal is much more specific. It's something that people can imagine in their minds. They understand it, and it puts some context around what you're trying to do. So I'm going to encourage you to create what I call an impact goal. An impact goal is simply an expression of the impact that your nonprofit will have during the year. So if you're creating an impact goal for 2021, which could be interesting because I don't think any of us really know what 2021 is going to bring, but we have to set goals anyway and plans. What impact do you want to have? Do you want to double adoptions, cut euthanasia, triple your TNR, do something else? What is it that you're trying to do that is going to make an impact? Now, here's the real deal about an impact goal. It is not the same old, same old. A lot of organizations just do what they've always done, and they don't really stop long enough to think about what they're doing or why they're doing it. And maybe this is you. Maybe you're busy and you don't really have time to stop and think because you have kennels that need to be cleaned, and you have animals that need to be trapped, and you have an immediate need of something right in front of you that you have to take care of. And I get that. That is the life of working in animal welfare and animal rescue. It's a kind of a constant barrage of different things that need your attention. However, it's really good if you can hit the pause button long enough to lift your head up and look around and say, okay, hang on. How many have we saved so far this year? And what did we want to do? How many do we need to do to really make a difference? How many do we need to do to really eliminate a problem? That's the kind of thing that you want to be thinking about. That's strategic thinking. That's the kind of thinking that makes fundraising easier. People love in the community when you can tell them, hey, we're closing in on eliminating a problem, and we need your help to get there. That's exciting. That's way more interesting to a donor than, well, we just need to raise more money so we can keep doing what we've always done. That's not very exciting at all. So I want to encourage you to really think through, what would your impact goal look like for the year, and how will that move you towards your strategic goal? So if your strategic goal is, maybe you look at your local shelter and you see that we normally have, let's say 25 senior cats a month that are brought in, and maybe they're brought in by people who pass away. Maybe, and you guys have all seen this, right? You got an older person who has 2 or 3 cats. They pass, the family doesn't want the cats, and the next thing you know, these bonded cats are at the shelter and they're terrified. So maybe you say, you know what? I think we could start a program to do something about that. And you say that's an unmet need in our community for people who are trying to figure out what to do with a loved one's pets, and you decide that's what you're going to be about. You start a program for that. You want to make sure that those 20 or 25 senior cats a month are not sitting there at the shelter completely terrified. And so you start a program to address that. That's going to be really easy to language. So if that's your strategy, then your impact goal, your strategy is to provide a way to find a new home for those animals. Your goal is, we don't want a single senior cat sitting at the shelter. So our goal is we're going to pull 25 a month. And that becomes your impact goal. That becomes what you start to tell people in the community, like, this is not okay. And boy, you can put some language around that in a heartbeat to help people understand how terrifying that is for those animals, and how they don't need to be there. The shelters are loud and they're noisy and they're scary. And those animals have just been completely uprooted. They just lost their person. And now they don't know where they are, and they're terrified. They're probably depressed. That would be really easy to language a program like that. Okay, hopefully this is making sense. You want to choose strategy first, then pick an impact goal. The impact goal should move you along the path toward reaching your strategic goal. So again, if your strategic goal is we want to provide a service for these companion animals so that they don't have to go to the shelter, and your impact goal is we're going to start with 20 or 25 a month, and we'll just see what happens from there. And again, this all makes fundraising easier. All right, so that's the G in GOAT, is getting your impact goal. It helps you know exactly what you're trying to do during the year so you can measure your progress, measure your success, and it also makes fundraising easier because you can tell people exactly what you're trying to do during the year, which is, just trust me on that, so much easier. All right, the next thing then is opportunities. So you want to start to look around. Once you choose your strategic direction, what are the opportunities? What are the things that are happening in the community that you could take advantage of or be part of or get involved with? So here's some questions that I want you to ask yourself, or if you have 2 or 3 board members or volunteers that you want to kick this around with, here's the kind of things you want to talk about. What needs are waiting to be met? And that's just a brainstorming session right there, where you think about what are the different things that are happening, just like these companion animals. What are things that are happening where nobody's really doing anything about this, but we need to? You know, several years ago, you started to see a lot of pet food pantries that were popping up because somebody looked around and said, hang on, wait a minute. There are people who are struggling to not only feed themselves, but also their pets. We need to do something about that. And that's how these kinds of things get started. So what are the needs in your community that are waiting to be met? What collaborations are possible? Who could you work with? Who's kind of doing something kind of similar that you could collaborate with to really address that need? And that can be really interesting when you get creative. That could be another nonprofit. It could be another rescue. It could be a business in town. It could be something completely different. So in the next county over from me, I've done some work with Meals on Wheels. So Meals on Wheels, as you know, they prepare food and they're delivering it to homebound seniors. And one of the things that they noticed was that some of their seniors had pets, and the seniors were feeding the pet food out of their meal because they didn't have pet food and they didn't have any way to go get pet food. So they collaborated with a local organization that had just started a pet food pantry in the area to be able to provide these seniors with this pet food, and it was beautiful. And they said, okay, that's great, but we're not done. Hang on, we're feeding them, but we got another issue. We got another issue that we've got animals that are not getting their vaccinations because they're living with homebound seniors. And so they reached out to a veterinarian in the community and they said, hey, is there any way you could do a ride along with us once a month? And let's just do house calls and do vaccinations for these animals. And they found a vet who said yes. And so they have a vet that goes with them to do house calls, to do vaccinations and health checks on the animals, which is beautiful. That's a nice collaboration. That's 2 nonprofits and a for-profit all working together to make sure that the animals with these homebound seniors are healthy. It's very cool. When you start getting creative, you'll find all kinds of cool collaborations that are possible. And let me tell you what, that little combination right there is one of the easiest things to raise money for. People love that. They love knowing that the homebound seniors are being cared for, the animals are being cared for. They love the idea of a vet making house calls because nobody does that anymore, right? So that's a really easy story to share in the community and people just love it. Another thing to ask is, how aware is your community of your cause? So for the strategy that you're taking, the impact goal that you're working on, how much do people know about that? Because if they don't know a whole lot, there may be an opportunity to do some education. And that can, depending on what that is and your community, that can be something that might be hard to do. It might be not so hard to do. It just kind of depends on your area and what the issue is. Then also look at what resources are available to you. There may be all kinds of things in your area, resources in terms of groups of volunteers or facilities that you could use, or things like, I don't know, supplies that are not being used right now for whatever reason. And right now is a really interesting time because of COVID. There are all kinds of resources that are available to you now that probably weren't available to you this time last year, especially in terms of people who are working at home who are looking for virtual volunteer opportunities, or people who are looking for things to get involved in because they're sick of being stuck at home. There's just all kinds of things that are available. And what I find the most important thing to do is look for opportunities, look for options. I think a lot of times we're all real busy. We tend to keep our heads down. We're very focused on what we got to do during the day, and we never look up long enough to look around and go, huh, look at that. Wonder what they're going to do with that. Wonder what's going to happen with this. Wonder what would happen if we fill in the blank. So we have to leave ourselves some time and space for thinking and dreaming and imagining and brainstorming. So always look for options, look for opportunities. If you are the kind of person who is not used to that kind of thinking, that may be a stretch for you to really think about and allow your mind to run with possibilities and opportunities. But when you're looking for options, your mind will kick into a different gear than it normally does. And if you need to get some help with that and brainstorm, totally fine. A lot of times 2 or 3 people can come up with all kinds of creative ideas, more so than just one person. All right. So those opportunities become part of your plan as you're thinking about what do you want to do in working towards your strategy and your impact goal. And you look around to see, okay, what are the opportunities here? What can we take advantage of? Those all start to mush together. And what falls out is the actions that you need to take. So for example, if you're thinking, well, I kind of like this idea of like maybe our community needs a pet food pantry. Maybe that's a real big deal right now because we have a lot of people who are out of work and so forth. And then you realize that there's all kinds of empty warehouses and empty storefronts because businesses have been closing. And so you reach out to a realtor and you say, hey, can we use that space for a while? Hey, by the way, I've done that sort of thing, and you actually can get space when it's not being used for something else, like get space for free for things, especially if it's just a short-term kind of situation. So once you get all that figured out, then it's time to get the calendar out and really start to nail down your action plan. This is where the rubber meets the road. And what I would recommend that you do is use something like this. So you literally can take a project, you can take a single piece of something and break it into the individual steps, and then label each one with what the step is, who's going to do it, and when it needs to happen. This is the level of detail that you need in your action plan so that you know exactly what needs to happen and so you can manage it. So how many of you have ever had the experience where you have a well-meaning volunteer who says, well, I want to help, and you say, great, can you go plan this fundraiser? And they say, sure. And they take off and you never hear from them again. And they fall very, very short of doing what you actually wanted them to do. Yeah, that happens a lot. When you put this kind of detail in place, it's easier to manage because you know what's supposed to be happening, they know what's supposed to be happening, and you can support them to make sure that they are getting the what done and by when. Now, one of the tools that we use around here is something we call backward calendaring, and this is super helpful. So let's say that part of your impact goal is to double the number of TNR, and you say, okay, so that means that we probably need more volunteers to help. So let's have a volunteer training session. All right, we're going to have a volunteer training session. When is that going to be? So you pick a date, you put it on the calendar. What you would do to backward calendar that is to think about everything that needs to happen in order for that volunteer training session to be a success, and you break everything into a separate step. And you start with the day of that volunteer training. So let's say that's going to be Saturday, October 17th, which is today. Well, what needs to happen the day before in order for that thing to happen on the day of? What needs to happen the day before that? What needs to happen the week before that? And you back it all the way out with everything going into an individual step until you know when you need to start with that. So it could be a volunteer training. You could backward calendar just about everything. Your newsletter, you can backward calendar. your fundraising appeals, your fundraising events, staff training, staff retreats, board meetings, everything can be backward calendared. And what happens when you do that, when you back things all the way out, what you'll find is if you want a newsletter to go out the middle of November, you probably actually need to be starting to think about it the middle of October in order to give yourself enough time to get everything done without working at the last minute. Remember, this is about being effective, not just busy. It's real easy to be busy, real easy to be busy, especially if you're not a planner and you're doing everything at the last minute. So when you start to back all this stuff out, your life is it's gonna calm down quite a bit. You're not gonna live nearly in the chaotic mode that you otherwise would, and it's gonna be easier to delegate things for other people. All right, so that's the action plan. This really is an important step, and this is one I want you to take really seriously. I know that a lot of people skip this because they're like, yeah, we don't need to really write that down. I'm going to challenge you to do it because I think you will find that if you take the planning process seriously, things will change. Things will change. You will be more clear about exactly what you need to get done in your nonprofit. You'll be personally more clear about what needs to be on your personal to-do list during the day. Fundraising gets easier. Communicating with donors gets easier. Like everything gets easier when you have a plan. And then it's not that you have the weight of all the unknown things on your shoulders. And that can happen when you don't have a plan, or if you have a plan, but it lives in your head because it's not in writing. That's actually harder because you have the weight of all those unknown things on your shoulders all the time. There's always that pressing of, I should be doing this. I should be doing that. I should be looking into grants. I should be planning an event. I should be thanking my donors better. I should be calling people. And we just should on ourselves. And that's heavy. That's heavy. And that will, it will squinch everything down, if that's such a word. It'll pinch down your creativity to where you can't think anymore. Just the weight of all that. So when you put your plan together and you action plan out every piece of things that you want to do, then you can look at any given day. You know exactly what needs to happen that day. And it's really nice to have those days when you do mark the last thing off before the end of the day and you have a chance to breathe or clean off your desk or go for a walk or do something else that gives you a chance to recharge your batteries. But none of that can happen if the plan is in your head. So get it out of your head, get it in writing, do the backward calendaring, get the action plan. All right, team, this one's important. You are not the Lone Ranger. This is not meant to be a solo sport. Animal welfare requires many, many people. I love what Stacy said earlier about for every cat that she was going out to work or to rescue, she needed 4 people working on fundraising. That was brilliant. That's true. You need many people helping raise money and helping you do things because you can't do everything yourself, even if you want to. So what I want to challenge you to think about here is skills. So not necessarily people. I want you to think about it functionally for a minute. What skills do you need to reach your goals? So if you want to be the premier TNR organization in your town, or if you want to save the senior cats from the shelter, whatever it is your strategy is, what skills do you need to reach your goals? And then look and see who's around you right now. So what skills do you have on your team right now? And that'll show you what you're missing. See, a lot of times what happens is people go, oh, we just need to go recruit volunteers. Go get somebody. Oh, hey, you've got a pulse. Come on over here and help us. Okay, that doesn't work. You guys all know that. I'm sure every single one of you could tell me a horror story about a volunteer who has driven you nuts or caused big problems or drama, and it just wasn't worth it. I get that. Volunteers can also be amazing. And when I say volunteers, we're going to include board members in that as well. So volunteers and board can be big, big help if you do it right. So you start by identifying the skills you need and the skills you have, and then you look at 3 things. You look at how you're recruiting people and the expectations that you set when you recruit. I'm going to encourage you to think about bringing volunteers in the same way you would bring a paid staff person in. You would never hire somebody without a job description, or at least an idea of what you want that person to do, right? So start with a job description. Think about how you're going to recruit the right person, how you're going to onboard them and train them and get them acclimated. And once that happens, how are you going to manage that person? How are you going to manage your volunteers? Do you maintain open channels of communication? Do they know that they can reach out to you anytime? Do you reach out to them? What does that look like? How do you know they're doing their job? How do you support them? Think about how you're managing people, and then think about how you're showing appreciation, because that's important with volunteers. It's important with paid staff too, but important with volunteers and with board members. So what does that look like? How are you telling people that you appreciate what they've done? I can't tell you how many times I have volunteered with organizations where nobody has ever said thank you to me at all. And that's crap. That is complete crap. These days, time is our most precious commodity. And when a volunteer gives you their time, that is one of the highest gifts they can give. We never should take that for granted. We never should grouch and complain about volunteers behind their back. And we should always be telling people thank you. If you have a volunteer who's not a good fit, they're in the wrong job, then move them to a different spot where they can be more productive and get somebody else in the original spot. But really thinking through skills that you need on your team and skills that you have now on your team helps you identify what you need. Hey, by the way, this is super helpful when it comes time for board members. So if you're like most organizations and you're thinking, oh man, our board, and then you just roll your eyes, I get it. I get it. There's lots of issues with boards, and there's lots of ways to fix it. Getting the right people on your board starts by identifying the skills and connections you need, and then treat them as if you were hiring them for a job. So have an application, interview them, onboard them correctly, set expectations very clearly for what you want them to do, and you'll have a much better experience. And this all goes back to strategy, because you're not going to be able to accomplish your strategic goals or implement your plan if you don't have the right people on your team to help you. You need people you can count on, right? You need people that will say they're going to do something and then actually do it. So make sure that you get the right people on your team. All right, the last piece of this is about tools. So what tools do you need to put your strategy in place and to reach your goals? One of the tools that you need is a fundraising plan. And well, you're going to hear a lot from a lot of different really awesome people today about fundraising. I want you to just think about the tools that you need in place. You may also need tools around helping you track what you're doing, the number of animals that you're saving. You may need financial tools to help you measure what you're doing in your organization in terms of budget, what money's coming in, what money's going out, and so forth. I wanted to give you this tool that can help you as you're identifying your fundraising goal. You start by planning your programs for the year. So don't do it the other way. Don't go out and just raise however much you can and then come back and say, well, we'll figure out how to spend this now. Start by planning programs for the year and then identify what that's going to cost in terms of direct program costs. So if you're going to do TNR and you need to buy new cages, how many new cages and how much is that going to cost? And what's your cost going to be for fuel, if you have any? What's going to be mileage reimbursement, if there is any? Then think about what you need to run your nonprofit during the year. That's administrative and fundraising costs. Add all of that together, and that's how much you need to raise. So for those of you earlier who responded in the poll and said you were brand new, screenshot this. Go work this process. This is how you need to figure out how much you need to raise. And the nice thing about this is, if you're planning out your programs first, you'll be able to identify the number of animals that you want to rescue or TNR or whatever your organization is doing. And then you can calculate what we call a core number, which is an expression of what it costs you to help just one animal or help one animal for one day. And that's a very powerful tool. It's a powerful number to use in fundraising, because it's not asking somebody to give $10 that goes into a black hole. It's asking somebody to give $6.20 to provide one day of care for a cat in need. All right, so look at the other tools that you need. Make sure that you've got what you need, because as if things weren't hard enough, now we're all dealing with COVID and trying to figure out how to manage through that. And what I want you to know, if some of you are thinking, well, it's a really hard year. Yes, it is. It is a hard year. And I want to bring you a bit of good news that there are a lot of organizations that are doing just fine in terms of fundraising, in terms of saving animals. They are finding a way. They are getting creative. Yes, they're pivoting. They're moving their events online. They're finding really creative ways to do things, and they're doing it. And you can too. These people out there who are like, I just saw an email this morning of one of my shelter clients is having a groundbreaking on a $5 million brand new shelter. They're breaking ground on a new shelter that they've just raised all this money for, right smack in the middle of COVID. That tells me that they're doing just fine. This is not an issue. There's money out there. There are still people out there who can give. You just have to ask. So yes, it's COVID, and yes, maybe what you had planned this year went out the window, but it's okay. You got this. You can do it. The key to all of this, and this is not just for Sandy's session this morning, but for everything you're going to hear today. You've got, like I saw my friend Julia is on the lineup this afternoon. You got some other great speakers. Always look for options when you run into roadblocks or feel stuck. Just always look for an option. Always ask yourself how. If you say, well, we had this thing planned, this isn't going to work. Okay, how can we do that? How can we find a workaround? How can we still make it happen? How can we do something equally effective? Keep looking for options and you will find them. You will find them. All right, just a couple more things and then we'll move into some Q&A. So I'm curious what you've learned. If you've been taking notes, here's what I would encourage you to do. Go back through your notes from this session, and actually at the end of today or tomorrow, go through your notes for the whole day. Highlight or circle the most most important ideas. So the biggest things that you hear today, highlight those, circle them. Carve out an hour or two on your calendar next week and block it off so that you can start working on these ideas that you heard today. Because if you don't take action on what you learned today, then it was just fun. We don't want this to just be fun for you. We want this to be very fruitful and productive. We want you to take what you've learned, do something with it, and go make a big difference. All right, I've got a couple of tools for you. Speaking of tools, one is something that we call the one-page fundraising plan. So for those of you who struggle to put a plan together, this will help you, and you can go download this for free at getfullyfunded.com/plan. It is just a way for you to get at a glance everything that's going to happen in your organization throughout the year so that you can see it and not always be at the last minute reacting to things. I want you to be able to see it and respond to it instead of being like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot we have this grant that's due in 10 minutes. I got to fill out this application. You should never be at the last minute doing much of anything. So this will help you. Go grab this one-page fundraising plan. And then we also have coming up something that we're calling the Facebook Fundraiser Challenge, because we're all about fundraising over at getfullyfunded.com. And we realize that there's a lot of people who are struggling to do a successful Facebook fundraiser. And when we look at what a lot of our folks are doing, we can see real clearly where it's going wrong. So we put this free challenge together. It starts Monday. So if you want to come join us, go to getfullyfunded.com/challenge. Doesn't cost anything. It's free. And what you're going to get is every day there's going to be a short lesson. Then if you just do the work during the week, next Friday, you're going to be able to launch a real live fundraiser on your Facebook page and raise some money for a specific solvable problem in your nonprofit. So come join us for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, you can reach out to me if you've got questions, if there's something that you want to know more about or anything I can help with. I am happy to chat. And speaking of chat, let's do some Q&A if there's anybody with questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandy. Sandy, feel free to turn on your webcam if you would like to join us and wave, just so that everybody knows that there's like a human being behind there.
I can, but it's Saturday, so I'm not all dolled up or anything.
So Sandy, I have something here. I was part of your inspired fundraising retreat. So I'm giving you one of these.
The emoji sticks are still around. I love it. I love it.
I was like, what am I going to do with these things? And so I found a use.
Perfect.
So if people like the emoji sticks, maybe Sandy will share with me how she did this and we can send them out to folks and they can print their own emojis. But anyway, lots of questions here. So one question that I have is around you know, how do you focus if you're a small organization, you've got calls for help for kittens, for trapping, you've got, 30 cats on your list of needing help. How do you prioritize your fundraising efforts when you have all this other stuff going on? And I'm going to put a tag on it also saying, how do you pull out a story? Because I used to always get overwhelmed by saying, every day there's a story. I
Yeah.
mean, there's always a story, but the question is which one? And we get into this like paralysis. So how can we get out of that chaos and be strategic?
Well, that's a good question. So, and I think it requires you to back up just a little bit. What I like to do as a fundraiser is I want to build a loyal donor base of people who love the organization. They want to see the organization succeed. And when you do that, when you stop focusing on the money and you start focusing on the relationships, you actually you'll wind up with a lot of people around you who say, we just love the work you do. Anytime you need anything, let us know. Okay, this is perfect. This is a great first start. Part of what we have to do as fundraisers is make sure we're giving people an amazing experience. The better the experience they have of giving, the more they're going to say that of like, oh, this is great. The next thing you want to try to do is start to match people's heart with your need. So in other words, um, if you've got kittens and you find out that John and Jane Smith, man, they are all about kittens. Then anytime you have a thing pop up with the kittens, you just reach out to John and Jane and they're going to fund it. The end. And that's when this starts getting real easy. So when you do realize you've got 6 cats over at the shelter that you need to pull, and you've got TNR, and you've got kittens, you've got like multiple things you need to raise money for. What I do first is I say, okay, how much am I looking at in each one of these? Can I call John and Jane about this kitten and just get that taken care of? And then I don't have to go to the public with that. The answer is yes. All right, I'm going to take care of that way. Okay, now I have the TNR and I have this other thing. The TNR, oh, you know what? I'm gonna go to my Facebook for that one because I know that my Facebook people respond to that really well, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm going to go there with that one. And then I'm going to email a different segment of my list for these other cats. So you see what I'm doing there? I'm starting to segment the donors. I'm starting to segment my activities and my efforts, knowing, and it's all about knowing your donors, knowing what they like, knowing what they're interested in. So you can start to do that. Now, if you have not done that kind of donor work and you're like, well, I don't really know I have anybody that loves kittens or whatever. Okay, you can work on that. But if you have all these different things you need to raise money for, I would start with the one where you need the most money, and it's a story that is going to be as universal as possible, or you can make it as universal as possible. So when you have issues that are like really, really, really specific, that people are not going to grab onto with their heartstrings, that's going to be harder to raise money for. So especially if you're going to go onto Facebook or you're going to go into email with an appeal, with an ask, I would want you to do something that's going to have as universal of appeal as possible. And what I mean by that is, if we go back to the example of these cats that belong to someone who passed away and now they're there, and we can describe these cats saying that they're depressed, they're lonely, they're sad, they're confused. Like most people can relate to being lonely, sad, and confused, right? So that's a universal kind of emotion. That's a universal experience that is going to work really well in that story for helping people respond. Does that help? That was
Yeah.
like a long convoluted
Well,
path with there.
so I mean, as we triage our requests for assistance in the animal welfare space, so you've got someone who wants to TNR or has a colony of 20 cats, and then another group maybe with 2 cats. You're gonna, depending on how your resources are, you're gonna prioritize, I'm gonna get all those 20 cats done so that they're not gonna have 20 cats worth of kittens, or I'm gonna spend a month and a half trying to trap those 2 cats because the lady next door refuses to stop feeding. So you're gonna do a triage and say, where am I gonna be most successful? So I think you're saying also, as we do that in the animal world, in our fundraising world, we should also think, where is our lowest hanging fruit and where am I gonna get the biggest bang for my buck, which is my time, which is really important.
Yep.
So I have some questions here around competing with other organizations for dollars, as well as concerns about donor fatigue, which I think sort of fall maybe in the same bucket. Questions about, same people getting multiple asks, and is that something we should be concerned about?
Well, I think it's good to be aware, and there are things that you can do to avoid it. So number one, most people who give to charity give to anywhere from 3 to 5 charities at the same time. So if you're asking your donors to give, they are probably getting requests from 3 or 4 or 5, maybe even more other organizations. There's nothing you can do about that. Don't worry about it. The thing that you need to worry about is being their favorite. How can you be that donor's favorite organization? And part of that is giving them an amazing experience. So what that means is after they give, you need to thank them really well. If you have never changed the default language on your online donation, go do that right now. Your thank you needs to be warm and sincere. It needs to have a picture in it. It needs to make the person go, oh, look at that. That's awesome. If it doesn't do that, you got big problems. The other thing that we share a lot is that you can't just be ask, ask, ask. And this is a big, big problem because in the animal world, you're moving fast, right? You've got a lot going on. Every day there's a new crisis. And so every day there's a new reason to ask. And so again, you have to hit the pause button for a second to back up and be strategic and say, we cannot show up with our hand out day after day after day without losing people. So how do we build some things in between all that asking that make people feel good? And at Get Fully Funded, we call those warm touches. So how are you building in those warm touch opportunities where you're not asking for anything, you're just showing like literally a video of a kitten. One of our folks in our fundraising TV program is Andy Bingham over at Esther Neonatal Alliance in Asheville. And Andy, I was feeding these ideas to Andy about a year ago. And so she literally starts sending out these videos of bottle feeding kittens. That's all it is. You know, and for most of you, you guys are probably like, whatever, it's not a big deal. Oh, no, her donors went nuts over these videos. And it's just a little kitten, just like 10, 15 seconds. But that was what she needed to share to give people that like, oh, moment so that people didn't feel like they were just being asked all the time. So it might be as simple as that, as looking around to see what's already going on in your organization that you can share that helps people feel really good about giving, and it interrupts all that asking so that you're not asking all the time.
And I think when I did your inspired fundraising retreat, it was something like, you know, three touches, 3 to 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have just a couple minutes left here. People have been sort of asking about this indirectly, and you referenced it in 60 seconds or less. Can you share what your core number is?
Yes. So core number is fantastic. It gives you a way to calculate what it costs you to deliver a unit of service. So if you have a traditional shelter, then what you want to do is tell somebody, here's what it costs to provide care for one animal for one day. And that's way more interesting to a donor than saying give $10. $10 falls into a black hole. But $6.20 because you've calculated it and you use the weird number, that not even number, people, number one, that builds trust immediately because people think, oh, you know your numbers, you've calculated that. So the way that you do it, and there's 2 or 3 resources on my website that you can go find out exactly how to do this. There's an article on the blog, there's a video, there's 2 or 3 things that'll teach you how to calculate this, but here's what you do. Look at last year, so 2019 numbers, and look at the total units of service. So the first thing you have to do is figure out your unit of service, whether that's a day's worth of care, or it's one spay neuter surgery, or it's whatever your organization does. Then look at your total expenses for that year. Everything, administrative costs, what you paid your accountant, everything. And you just divide it out. So you divide the total expenses by the total units of service, and it will tell you exactly what it is. If your number is about $10 or less, you're in real good shape because that's a real easy yes for a lot of people. If it's higher, that's okay. We have a client that their core number is $51 and something for a day of care for a dog in a shelter, but we have to explain why it's $51. We have to explain that the animals that they take they've got serious medical issues, serious behavioral issues. They're providing training. They're doing all the stuff they need to do to make these dogs adoptable. And once we do that, people go, oh, okay. The core number is amazing, and it makes fundraising so much easier when you can tell people exactly what their dollar is going to do.
Excellent, Sandy. Thank you so much. I know that there are other questions out there, folks, but I think a lot of the questions that I skipped over will actually be covered during the rest of the day today. So just be patient and hold on that. Sandy, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us and really appreciate you and all that you're doing to help us with fundraising. It's fantastic.
My pleasure. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. You've got some great stuff coming up.